You're listening to an ASCII Lounge podcast.
This is Talking Supply Chain, where we tackle the most important supply chain topics and trends with the industry's best and brightest.
Welcome back to the ASCII Lounge. I'm Monique Fennick from Australasian Supply Chain Institute, and joining us on the lounge today is Mike Reid, Managing Partner of Wight Asia Pacific. Welcome back to the ASCII Lounge, Mike.
Oh, hi, Monique. How are you today?
Great, thank you. And I say welcome back because you're quite a regular on our ASCII Lounge, which we're very pleased to say. Oliver Wight is ASCII's corporate member and partner, and Mike has been generous enough to share his experience and the Oliver Wight expertise. He himself has 25 years of experience in strategy management, product and portfolio management, and integrated business planning. And we're very pleased to share that with the ASCII community, given especially the past year that we've all had. The partnership also allows ASCII members to redeem a 10% discount on Oliver Wight short courses. And there have been some really great short courses, Mike, that you guys have been running recently. So I do encourage you to head over to the Oliver Wight website featured in this podcast brief to check those out. But today's topic is not about the short courses. In fact, this time it's about a recently launched new book entitled Integrated Tactical Planning, Respond to Change, Increase Competitiveness and Reduce Costs. Mike will explain the genesis of the book and why the deployment of ITP, or Integrated Tactical Planning as we're going to call it today, ITP, helps senior executives devote more time to strategy and other value-added activities. So to kick us off, Mike, why was this book written in the first place?
Well, I guess, Monique, what's happened here, we've seen over, I guess, quite a number of years now that lots of companies have put time and energy into getting their IBP or S&OP processes up, but they don't really have control over the short-term execution. And so what happens is that the plans that they're developing in their S&OP or IBP processes don't actually get executed that well. So we launched ITP as a concept about 3 years ago, specifically to address that problem. Since then, there's been a significant amount of interest in ITP around the world. And this book really was put together as a go-to reference guide for those companies that are wanting to know more about ITP and get their organisation started on their integrated tactical planning journey.
And who are the authors and what's their background?
So there's 4 authors all up. So they're people from around the Oliver Wight community, essentially. 2 of them happen to be from Australia, which is rather good, isn't it?
Great.
So Rod Hozak is one of our Asia Pacific partners located in Sydney. Rod's actually taken the lead on this. It was him that was really instrumental in getting ITP up and running in the first place. You had sort of 3 or 4 years ago. He pioneered the development of our whole ITP methodology, and he really drove this book as well. So he's the lead author. There are 3 others. Stuart Harmon, who is also Sydney-based. Stuart's got a really strong background in FMCG and in engineering companies in supply chain management. The 3rd author is a guy named Todd Ferguson. Todd Ferguson is one of my US colleagues. So he comes out of a variety of experience in sales and order fulfillment, demand management, and IBP across quite a wide variety of industries. The 4th author is one of my UK associates, so that's Dawn Howarth. Dawn has 20 years experience in global supply chain management and demand management. She worked across many international markets. So those 4 people really got together. They've driven a lot of the development of the ITP process, and they collectively put this book together really with Rod's leadership out of all of that.
Yeah, and this is Oliver Wight's 60th anniversary, or we're into the 61 years. Is that right?
Or not quite. We're 50. We were 50 years
50.
old, the year before last. So you can say now we're at our 52nd year. So quite a bit of time that we've spent at this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to make that point because I think it's really important to position you guys as the experts in IBP and ITP and how that has evolved over time. It's great to see a new book out. Um, so, why do you think this particular topic on integrated tactical planning, like why is a weekly process so important?
Well, really, what happens here is that, as I was saying earlier, the IBP process and the SNIP process have been around a while, so most companies are familiar with that and get that, and there's a variety of maturity in IBP and SNIP, of course. But most companies say, well, okay, we've got one of those, and we can plan for the future. But the difficulty is they really can't execute all that well. There are things going on in the short term that make that plan come undone, essentially. So that weekly process, which is really ITP, it's about ensuring that IBP or SNIP plan can be effectively executed, taking into account those changes that will happen on the short term. So the consequence of that is that the senior management of the organisation can spend more time on strategy and managing change in the longer term, which is really what they want to get after, rather than being dragged into the short-term execution stuff all the time, which is what happens without ITP.
Mm, I see. And so, what are some of the symptoms that would suggest, existing weekly processes are inadequate? What happens?
Well, what we see is, firstly, the executive are continually getting involved in these tactical issues. So they're getting dragged down into it. So that's wasting their time. It's taking their eyes off that ball, which is about driving the company towards its strategic aims. The second thing we very often see is that in the SNIP or IBP process, that monthly management business review or executive SNIP is now looking at the short term instead of the long term. So we get a contradiction in terms going on here. We've got a monthly process that's focused on the next week or so. Makes no sense. It's not been underpinned, in other words, by this execution piece. We really can't predict our end of year position with any confidence. We find the plans keep changing, so there's lots of change to the short term going on, which just again lots and lots of firefighting essentially. And we see that even though we should be keeping our cost and inventory under control, they're going up, and customer service is going down. And people say, well, what's our SNIP or IBP process doing then? Isn't it supposed to sort this out? Well, yes, it should, but only if we've got a way of effectively executing that.
Yeah, great. And so, what's the difference then? Because I hear you talk about monthly process as well. So, is there much distinction between the weekly process and the monthly process?
Oh, I think, yeah, it's really important to get this distinction too. So IBP or SNIP is about the longer term. So out to 24 or even 36 months or even longer in some cases, depends how far out a company wants to see in order to be able to line up with their strategy. So IBP is about aligning plans across the company, across all the various functions and various core processes. And it's about focusing on everyone on achieving the company's goals and making sure we're getting there. ITP is about the shorter term. That's about the execution piece. So if you think about the monthly IBP process is aligning upwards towards the business plan and strategy, and it directs down to what needs to get done day to day. So weekly ITP sits in between that, and it aligns upwards to that IBP plan and directs down to day. So it fills that gap really of ensuring that, hey, look, we know where we're going. IBP or SNIP is telling us that, and we know how we're getting there because we're monitoring it along the way. So we make sure, therefore, through ITP, that we're actually calming down that process of management and communication in that execution window. And we're bridging that divide, which often happens between the various functions, and we're consequently leading to improvements in customer service, inventory levels, and in other key metrics.
Yeah, and I can see that because I've actually looked up the book, and I'm really going to get it. It's great for the ASCII library to have this on the shelf, and because it says in the blurb on Amazon that the authors share business proven concepts, define fundamental terms, and provide real life examples of how integrated tactical planning has been applied in various industries and businesses. And are they global businesses, Mike? Leading to my question, like what time zone does weekly process manage? So
Okay.
how's that worked out?
So I guess in answer to a couple of questions here. One, in terms of those examples that are given. So we launched ITP about 3 years ago, and we've now had obviously quite a bit of experience with companies, working in global companies, multinationals, local companies, all getting a significant benefit through an ITP process underpinning their IBP or SNOP processes. The time zone the weekly process manages, we define that as it is inside the cumulative lead time for supply. Right, that's actually really important. So outside that cumulative lead time, we can set the plan up. And that's what's actually happening in IBP or your SNOP process, is that it's looking longer term, it's setting us up for success, but it doesn't guarantee success if that plan is not therefore monitored through into that execution zone, which is inside the lead time. So inside the lead time is typically about 12 weeks or so. It does vary from company to company, and it's all dependent on what is the lead time in supply, usually about 12 weeks. So.
Yeah. And so what's required for a robust weekly process? What do we need in our list of, I guess, good to have?
Good to have. Well, we'd define these as essentials, necessary to have. What have we really got to get control of? Firstly, we have to really understand that time fence piece. So that time fence is the cumulative lead time for supply. And we have to have processes in place that manage changes to the plan inside the time fence. So that's essential, must do. Now, a lot of us knew this years ago, but we stopped doing it for some reason or another. So managing time fence, managing change inside the time fence. We need to identify the roles that are associated. We refer to that as the quorum of key roles. So who's involved? Pardon me, I just have to have a little cough here. The people in the organisation who are essentially involved with monitoring that plan through to execution. Those people need to be identified, and they're a really important part of the ITP process. We call that the ITP quorum. We need to think about managing by the vital few. Again, just a common approach years ago that we all understood, this whole ABC, Pareto analysis and all the rest of it, focusing on the 80-20 rather than getting distracted down into the things that don't really matter. So that's really, really important, because we are talking about detail in the short-term zone. We're no longer talking in that aggregate, the product family, etc., that we might talk about in IBP or SNOP. We're talking about the line items. So we want to make sure we're focused on the right stuff. The fourth and really important piece is that we need to understand and apply the concept of demonstrated capability. What are we capable of doing? That demonstrated, that proven run rate, for example, in supply. That those are fundamentals that we have to have in place. If we don't have those in place, that weekly process won't work. We also need to think about, we're driving continuous improvement. So having a culture of continuous improvement is really important, looking for ways to improve all the time. And finally, really having a passion for managing our data. If our data is wrong, the plan won't be right. It can't be. It's built on quicksand if the data is not correct. So we really have to get the data right. So I'd list those as 6 fundamentals, I should say, not 4. The first 4 I mentioned, 6 fundamentals that must be in place in order to get that weekly process robust. Without those, it won't stand up.
Mike, who do you recommend should read this book?
Well, I say there's a variety of people that could read it, because there's something in that for everybody. There's a really good case study of how this thing was put together, which will no doubt appeal to senior people who would be interested in this. There's a lot of stuff on behaviour change, which again is really directed towards that senior leadership. And there's some really good how-to stuff, which is more directed towards the practitioners, if you like, who are going to put this thing together. So a variety of audiences, really, from the senior leadership team on down through those practitioners who are trying to make this thing happen.
Yeah, I also agree all ASCII members would find it very interesting. So you can get this on Amazon following the link in the podcast blurb. It's been great having you back on the ASCII Lounge, Mike. Thanks for joining us, and really excited about the book. Congratulations, and pass our congratulations on to the authors.
Thank you very much. So I certainly will.
Okay, and thanks for joining us today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast today. For more information about our supply chain community, visit ascii.org.au.